I am Kenny Anderson, Director of Multicultural Affairs for the City of Huntsville, and welcome to Impact. Each week we bring you information about exciting things that are happening right here in this community, and today will be no different. I have the privilege today of talking with a very special guest. He happens to be somebody that I've worked with in a variety of other capacities. He's none other than the editor of the Redstone Rocket, Skip Vaughn, and most recently has gained the title of author for a book that he published, or wrote, I should say, and was published, called Vietnam Revisited. Skip, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you, Kenny. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you here, and it's good to be able to have this opportunity to talk about this book that I think is so important in terms of American history and world history, our understanding of a variety of things as it relates to our military conflicts, past and present, as well as where we go forward in the future and how we go forward in the future. So thank you for being here.
Yes, sir.
Tell me what the impetus of this book was.
Well, the United States is commemorating 50 years since the Vietnam War. So my newspaper at Redstone, the Redstone Rocket, in January of 2015, we started a series called Vietnam Revisited, where we interview Vietnam veterans and Vietnam era veterans every week. And so to date, I've interviewed 147 of these veterans. These are veterans in our community who served in uniform during the Vietnam War.
What kind of stories have they told you?
Amazing stories about amazing people. I mean, these were people who didn't go to Canada. They were called to military service, and they went and they served this country. They fought for us, and many times they bled for us. And during that time, of course, this was an unpopular war. They were being shunned. They were being called baby killers. They were being verbally and physically abused. It's ridiculous what they went through during that time. For the most part, they came back to the United States. They took off their uniforms and they quietly either kept serving in the military or they went back to their civilian jobs. There was no homecoming. There was no welcome home because in general, America resented them for serving in the Vietnam War.
Prior to the most recent conflicts that we've had with Afghanistan, et cetera, the Vietnam War had been the longest war that had been fought in the United States.
Yes, the numbers don't tell the full story, but from 1964 to 1975, 11 years, 8 million Americans served in the military. 2.5 million actually served in Vietnam, including 11,000 women. 58,000 died in Vietnam, including 8 women. 1,600 are still listed as missing in action. So some families are still dealing with the pain and the loss. But these 2/3 of the Americans who served in Vietnam were volunteers. They went so voluntarily. And so it proved the concept of an all-volunteer force, which we still have today. The draft ended in 1973. 97% of Vietnam veterans were honorably discharged from military service. Wow. So it did make this country stronger. It proved that an all-volunteer force could work. And we learned a hard lesson. We learned that we should never go to war unless we intend to win.
And the whole notion of this being an undeclared war, which actually added to some of the confusion in some people's minds about why we were there, that ultimately led to some of the anti-war demonstrations where people felt like we needed to be out of there because this was a war that really didn't have a sense of clarity, and certainly had in many ways divided the country. You had a lot of people that, as you said earlier, embraced that as a problem in terms of this nation's commitment to a war. And the reality then became, as you said, that the people, the veterans who returned from that war were oftentimes discounted in so many ways. They were never really honored. They were never really celebrated. We see patchy things happening right now, but you and I are both from that era. You know, I know you're 62, I'm 60.
Yes.
We could have been easily Vietnam veterans today.
Exactly.
Just because of our age. And so, we remember that time. And I wonder for you, if you could just maybe talk about what was that time like for you as a young person growing up with the potential of having to go to war?
It was a very scary time, a very stressful time. I didn't understand all the politics, but I did understand that some of my classmates were getting draft notices. I went to Butler High School. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but I got down here in 1968, went to Butler High School. I was in Air Force Junior ROTC there at Butler High. And I remember a classmate of mine, Joel Hankins, he was a couple of years ahead of me. He graduated and he joined the Army. He went into the Rangers. His very first night mission, he got killed. And now on Redstone Arsenal, Hankins Drive, which is near the Fox Army Health Center, is named after him.
Wow.
And when I go to Washington once a year in October, I go to the wall and I see his name up there, Joel Hankins. So it personally impacted me. I remember a friend of mine, we played around, we played pickup football together right up the street. He got a draft notice. And when I heard he got a draft notice, I went home and cried. And I was just 14, 15 years old, but it was a very scary time. And I know how how the military was viewed back then. It wasn't pretty at all.
Yeah.
They were not respected at all. And it's really a shame, because whether you were for the war or against the war, you should still be for the military people who went over there to fight for us.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, unequivocally. And which always leads me to the whole notion of how I think our veterans should be celebrated at every turn. I think that there should be nothing that they have to fight for. I mean, after having done what they've done already, to know that they come home oftentimes and they have to fight for just basic kinds of things, housing, jobs, dignity and respect in some cases, as it was in the Vietnam War.
Exactly.
It's really a tragic statement about, sending somebody off to war who either did not voluntarily go but willingly served, or somebody who, went and willingly served. In either situation, you have somebody that put the ultimate sacrifice on the line. Some people paid that ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms that we enjoy today.
That's true. Many lost their lives, like we said, 58,000, including 8 women. And they lost limbs. I talked to a Vietnam veteran here in Huntsville. He lost part of his leg, and he was recuperating in Hawaii, and he's on crutches in the bank. And some war protesters, they entered the bank and started calling him names. And so the people at the bank had to send them out. But that's just part of what they went through. That's just an example. Another serviceman or another veteran, he gets back home and he's hitchhiking near Trussville, and a car pulls up next to him, and the guys in the car start shooting at him. He had to jump into a ditch to avoid the bullets. And he had served us in Vietnam, and that's how he was welcomed back home.
Wow, wow, shameful.
Yes.
In so many ways.
Yes.
What do you hope, what is the message from publishing this book?
Well, besides the inspirational stories, it gives us true respect for what these people went through. The sense of urgency, I feel, is that most of them, the average age is mid-70s now. Of the 90 veterans who I've featured in my book, 4 of them have died within the past year. So I feel a sense of urgency to talk to as many as I can to preserve their stories, because their stories need to be told. They need to be given the true respect that they deserve, and the country needs to truly understand what they sacrificed for us during that time.
And these stories, I can imagine, Skip, are as individualized as the persons that tell them.
Yes.
Each story comes to you in its own unique way, I'm sure. They had a common experience in terms of Vietnam, but a very individual relationship to that war and to that experience. Because when you factor in families that these men and women left behind, and ones that did return or perhaps did not return, that's the legacy of their lives. That's the legacy of their experience. And it has to be as unique and individual as each person.
Yes, it is. And really, through history books tell the stories of generals, commanders, but really the people who actually fight the wars, those are the enlisted people, the officers who are out there on the front lines, and they don't get the attention that they deserve. We don't really hear their stories. So it's really an honor for me that they share their stories with me, and I get to tell them. And they vary. These are men and women. I interviewed a woman, retired colonel, who lives in Madison, Now, Carol Kirk, she's originally from Massachusetts. She was a Army nurse over there in Vietnam. And she told me about, she was on duty, of course, treating the wounded. And her fiance was a helicopter pilot. And he was brought in. He was badly injured. He had been shot down. And he died while she was on duty. Wow. Those are the type of stories I'm hearing. I mean, they hadn't talked about them in 30, 40, 50 years, and they're sharing these stories with me.
That's a great point, too, because, again, coming back from an unpopular war, a lot of people came back and there was no acknowledgement that they had been there, that they had fought in this war.
Exactly.
It was a closing in many ways for many of these veterans. And so they have not had a chance to cathartic and let this process as a result of this experience. So this has to be, for many of the people you're talking to, a cathartic experience. That's
very true. I've had veterans cry when they're talking. It gets emotional because they're letting stuff out that they hadn't shared in decades.
Yeah.
And so it's really, it helps them. Yeah. I mean, and they talk about their families, and of course the families are part of this too. It's not just the service member that sacrifices, also the families. So it's really amazing stories I'm hearing from people.
Skip, if people want to get a hold of the book, congratulations again on publishing it. I think we've talked before, there may be another book in you somewhere.
There might be. It depends on how this one goes, but
all right.
So far it's doing well nationally, and it's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It is on the bookshelves here in Barnes & Noble in Huntsville. So it's doing real well. It's off to a good start. It's published by Page Publishing out of New York.
Right, and that, of course, is part of the backstory as well, which time would permit us to be able to tell them more of that. But as you continue to talk to these veterans and share their stories, we'd love to have someone come on the show sometime, too. If you find a really unique story and somebody wants to come on and tell that, and we can kind of combine that conversation with your work and your mission to be able to tell as many of these stories and to support your urgency that I think we all feel because of this generation of heroes that lost the opportunity in many ways to be celebrated and honored.
That's true. That's very true. And if there's a veteran out there, Vietnam veteran or Vietnam era veteran, my email address is skip.vaughnsports@gmail.com. And Vaughn is spelled V-A-U-G-H-N. But if they want to email me, I'd love to talk with them.
Okay, skip.vaughnsports@gmail.com.
Yes,
Skip, thank you for being here with us today. We appreciate all that you're doing, and thank you for sharing this great information with us.
Thank you, Kenny.
All right. Well, thank you for being a part of our conversation today, and we hope that you learned a lot from this great author, Skip Vaughn, who has actually spent some time compiling the stories of Vietnam veterans, listening to these stories with a degree of sensitivity that it takes to be able to understand the experiences of these individuals, and then to be able to tell those stories again through the published material that has become a book called Vietnam Revisited. We hope that you'll take an opportunity to check out that book, and that you'll also perhaps check out the show that we just showed you on television on our Facebook page, which is Impact with Kenny Anderson. You can also check us out on YouTube at the same name. In the meantime, we hope that you will have a great rest of the day. And as always, for Impact, I'm Kenny Anderson. Have a great day.